everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out to our event, the International Game Developers Association. It's the largest global professional organization of people that work in game development, which includes everybody from people that are programming the games, to the art, to the legal, to the marketing, to the production, all aspects of game dev. And again, I'm not gonna read through all this. Most of this is on the IGDA website. So real quick about our chapter. So we're the North Carolina Triangle chapter, which includes Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill, and all surrounding areas. We've been back in business now for about a year. Started last August, post-COVID, so we're very excited. We have on our board myself, Vivek, who's gonna be giving our talk in a moment, Jonathan, Armand, and Garrett. Some upcoming events that are very important to know. There's an Unreal Engine Dev Meetup next week, or I think that's next week, yes, on the 28th. Our next event for IGDA is at Gamers Geekery in Cary. We've done this several times. It's a board game cafe, super fun. And then TIAC, which is the Triangle Interactive Arts Collective, which I know some of you are familiar with. They are a group that has a space right next door, an office space, and they host their playtesting nights right in this room. So it's very convenient, easy to find, and those are open to everyone, right? Not just people that work in game dev. So you're welcome to come out to any of those. As well as our IGDA events. You don't have to be a member to come out, and you don't have to technically work in game dev if you want to just come out and learn more about game dev. We're not exclusive at all. We're very inclusive groups. And then there's a QR for our link tree, which includes our information as well as information for TIAC and all the other groups in the area. And then I'm not going to really talk about this, but if you did want to join, here's a QR for it. But like I said, you don't have to join to participate in our events. So moving on to our talk, Vivek is one of our board members. He's the vice chair, is going to give an amazing talk. And I want to thank first, before Vivek comes up, Frontier for giving us this space and allowing us to host this during their out of office event. They've been very gracious and they've welcomed us to do this quarterly. So we're going to have another event in November. I believe it's the 18th, but whatever that Thursday is before Thanksgiving is when our event is. And we're going to have a different topic for each event, which is partially why I asked everybody to please share what topics you would like to see covered. So with all that being said, Vivek, I'm going to pass it along to you. And again, thank you all for coming.
All right, cool. Thanks so much, Jeannie. And thank you guys for showing up today. So I'm going to be talking about better products to play. And so just like, a quick temperature check, show of hands. How many of you guys are not involved in games in some capacity, like professionally?
Professionally?
Yeah, professionally. Actually, yeah, just any sort of like haven't really thought about games as a hobby or as a profession, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So so basically this talk I kind of like designed it so that it straddles both like just tech and just software engineering and product design and things like that, as well as games as an industry. So I hope that whether you're in games or not, you kind of are able to take something out of it. Yeah. So I'm Vivek Vidyasagaran. Like Jeannie said, I'm part of the IGDA, where we sort of host events like this, and you guys are invited to all of our events in the future. Just a bit about my experience from the past. I did a master's in entertainment technology, they call it, at CMU, where we also did like game design and art and movies and all that. And I worked at two companies in edtech, sort of the games and edtech. So I was building like games for kids to teach them like coding, art, language, things like that. And then right now I am CTO at a company called Pineline. It's a small startup. We do social games and gifting products and things like that. Part of the reason I really enjoy thinking about stuff like this is I was always interested in games, but more from the game design perspective. I wasn't really a gamer, growing up. I wasn't competitive, I didn't do esports, but I really like games though, and I kind of found it hard to fit in the industry. And I think as I sort of did my masters and stuff, I realized that there was this whole niche of professions where you kind of use game industry concepts outside of just pure AAA games, and so that's kind of something that I really enjoyed, and that's kind of like the theme of this talk. So, if you're just building a product, say you're like a product manager or like software engineer or whatever, why should you care about games, right? Games are something that you probably just do to unwind and not think about work, right? So why do you want to think about games during work? And I have sort of like two perspectives to this. One is games allow experimentation. So there's this like thinking, I guess, in tech where a lot of like consequential like big companies have sort of started off as just like little gimmicks or fun projects, and that is sort of like given them enough space to experiment and really find something that resonates with people, and then they can sort of grow from there. So the classic example, I'm sure most of you remember the Facebook of old that looked like this, and it was just fun. You just log on after school, chat with your friends, and so it wasn't taken seriously, and so I think they used that time to really figure out sort of what resonated with people. And now this is what Facebook looks like, right? Like it's polished and it's honestly like world changing, right? Like they have a lot of power in the world. So it's that sort of like growth, right? That is enabled by the fact that it was taken as a fun small thing in the beginning. And a more I guess relevant example is GPUs. GPUs were incubated in games. NVIDIA was considered a gaming company for the longest time, and now no one thinks of NVIDIA like that. It's all AI, right? And the only reason they got to this place was because they had all that time to sort of like really perfect the technology. So that's one side of it, right? So you can sort of use all of the creativity and the effort that game developers have put in and sort of learn from that for products. On the other side, games prioritize UX. So basically, who knows what app this is? I don't know if you can read the text there, but this is a bunch of dollar signs and numbers. It's Vanguard, okay? So who knows this one? Yeah, okay, there you go. So already, like, more people know Robinhood than Vanguard, right? When Robinhood first came in, it was sort of like, immediately started appealing to like the younger demographics, and the users sort of really like spiked. And Vanguard sort of does similar things. I guess I'm not actually sure all the things that they do, but I know you can trade stocks, and all my friends, everyone I've spoken to, always trade stocks on Robinhood. And a big part of that, and this is something that the Robinhood folks have talked about, is they sort of use game design concepts, just making things fun to use, fun to play around with, and just like clean and nice to interact with. And that sort of like make all the difference, right? These apps are functionally the same, but this, for example, I just pulled these stats from the iOS store, and 4.4 million people, I'm using like ratings as a proxy for usage, but you can see it's like more than an order of magnitude difference between people who use Robinhood and Vanguard. So that's kind of like the motivation for why you should care, right? And so now the question is, okay, how do I do this? And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about this word. It's probably what you thought of when you saw the title itself, gamification. And I just pulled up like the dictionary definition of gamification, and I actually like this definition. It says the process of adding games or game-like elements to something so as to encourage participation, right? That sounds open-ended and straightforward. But I feel like over the last few years, it's sort of come to mean about something very specific. It's like streaks or points or score and things like that. And every app is just basically trying to like pull those things and put it into the app. So I did this like little exercise. I took Squad Busters, which I've been playing a lot lately. It's like one of the latest games from Supercell. And I just took like the homepage screenshot, and I just went around thinking about like what different pieces of gamification they have in there. So for example, they have avatars, they have badges, and the images you see there are like other apps that are not games that kind of use the same concept. So that's GitHub, which has badges, and you have the Apple Watch, the classic fitness rings as like a progress bar thing. You have like Tinder with their timed gating of the number of times you can like something or whatever. I don't know. And yeah, so this Strava, they have this whole challenge mechanism, and it's timed, and you have like this events and stuff where you just use it as a way to generate hype, I guess. And then there's like countless examples. There's Peloton here, there's levels. So basically, you can see how like the games sort of like split into all of these different features, which different apps have sort of like adopted for themselves. The question is, how can we do better, right? If we can do this, it's quite straightforward nowadays, but we can definitely do better than that because games are a lot more engaging than these apps, right? One of the books that I always turn to, which I think is a great book, Jesse Shell was my professor at CMU actually, and he wrote this book just sort of like summarizing all the things that he has learned about game design. And one of the things he talks about is what are the components of a good game. I hope the text is big enough to read, but anyway, like the details aren't important, but it's just basically, there's a whole bunch of components that sort of work together to make a good game. Right? And whatever game you really enjoy, you can think about that through the lens of these components. And so with gamification, kind of what happens is you sort of take like certain subset of these components, right? Like there's judgment, there's reward, there's goals, and you sort of like, you're just picking those things out and putting them in your app and hoping that it changes something. And it does change something, but it's not as effective as a whole game. And part of the problem, I think, is that the real magic of this is the interaction between the components, right? So for example, a game might make you curious about something, and then that curiosity level goes up until the reveal, and then it's a surprising end, right? So it's that interplay between curiosity and surprise, or skills and goal, where you're building up your skill through the game, and then now you have this goal of defeating the boss or whatever. And so it's that interaction, and that stuff gets lost when you sort of just pull one thing and put it in an app. Another way to think about this is like a theory of self-determination theory is what it's called, and it's basically sort of putting down why people do things. And so on the left you have like extrinsic motivators, and on the right you have intrinsic motivators. And you ideally, you feel good when you do something that you're intrinsically motivated by, and you know, extrinsic things are just stuff that you have to do. And you know, gamification often falls on the extrinsic motivation side, so you kind of do it, but you don't feel great about doing it at the end of the day, and that is not good. So coming back to the Squad Busters example, this is the screen I showed you, and sort of like took you know, the pieces apart. But the thing is, so you know, this game has all of these gamification elements, right? But what makes it such a compelling game, though? It's none of these things. It's actually this screen, right, which is the actual game. This is what players are coming in to play, and you know, all the other stuff is just like the icing on top. This is full of like, you know, deep stories, characters, and you know, like the interaction between them, and there's skill involved. There's all of these things, and so this is what really makes the game. And so how can you sort of like pull these elements out into, you know, other apps and things that you're working on? So yeah, that's basically the question, right? How can I build better products through play? And so over time, I've started thinking about this as this spectrum of game integration. And so on the left, you have like just pure apps, or you know, websites or whatever. And then on the right, you have games, like just regular games that you play and you sort of know. And then in the middle, roughly in the middle, is this gamification thing of like all the stuff that I showed you, the streaks and points and all that. And the way I sort of have started thinking about this is like there are these other points in the spectrum that are also interesting and that might be the way to go. So for example, on the, you know, between apps and games, you have something I'm calling the game components. And so these are basically taking all of the components that I showed you before and sort of inserting them deep into the experience, right? Not just as a superficial layer on top, but like deep inside. So I'll give you some examples of what I mean by this. But basically what I'm saying is, take a fresh look at your products through the lens of game development. What parts of the experience is fun? What parts could be fun? And the key thing is make moments of joy that people will remember, right? So some examples. So yeah, the words on top are just like stuff, the components that I pulled out from that table you saw. This is, you know, the classic Mario Kart, you know, question mark box. It's always exciting to know what you're gonna get, right? And kind of comparing that to the Google Doodle, which is sort of the same feeling, right? Like you just log into Google to search for something, and then you suddenly see this little doodle there. You're like, okay, what is that? And there's always like an element of surprise when you log into the page. Curiosity. So this is just a map from a game called Kingdom Rush. And what's interesting is they kind of show you the whole map from the beginning. So you start off in whatever, like the plains or whatever, but then you always kind of have this curiosity of like, okay, what happens when I get to the mountain or whatever. So that kind of drives you forward. Here, sort of as a tech example, I've shown Midjourney, which did this cool thing of like just putting everything up on Discord and making it all public. So everyone is just prompting things, and you're like curious to see what others are prompting and learning from that. So it was like an interesting mechanism to get people to just do this weird AI thing, right? Because back when they started, it wasn't very common. Flow state, it's this is sort of that state you get to where you're just like fully focused and you have nothing to distract you, and you're just in the zone. And this is Beat Saber. It's actually a VR game, and it's super immersive, right? Once you put it on, you kind of have everything that you need on the screen, and your job is just to execute, right? And as you keep doing that, you just get into that flow state, and you just feel great about it. And I've compared that to coding, which is what I do most of the day. But honestly, I feel like modern development environments like this VS Code do a really good job of getting you in that state, right? Because you have everything right there with you. You have your like file browser, you have your terminal, you have multiple code windows, whatever you need. And so you don't need to get out of that state, right? So you can just start getting into that state, and then you're very productive. So those are just some examples. But basically, the idea is to think about your core product and sort of like how you can integrate these components. Just sort of passively thinking about the components and sort of what they mean in games itself, I found like you just sleep one night and then next day you're like, wait a minute, I can probably integrate that somehow. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of just like keeping these things in the back of your mind and letting it simmer. Yeah, so that's game components. And then on the other side, I have what I've called constrained games. And this approach is a bit different. So basically, the way you would approach something like this is you start off with just building a fun game, right? So, and this might sound weird for a tech product, but just bear with me and I'll give you examples at the end. Just build a fun game and then add design constraints that actually achieve whatever goal that you're trying to achieve, right? So whether it's a finance app or whatever it is. So I think this modality sort of really came about in EdTech. And if you think about it, EdTech sort of has a natural sort of callback, I guess, to games, because games kind of, like the whole point of games is that you need to learn something to be good at them, right? And so the question is like, how do you get that learning to be useful in just real world? And so I think people caught onto this idea of like, okay, so what if you just make a game and then you add this like learning objective into it, right? And that's kind of like a lot of what I did in my previous jobs. So this was at Osmo, where it's basically just like a regular looking game that's running on the iPad, right? And kids don't really think about it as anything else. But then the twist is that you're controlling this character through these coding blocks. So you're sort of telling it to walk up 3 steps, turn right, and you have like loops and you have branches and things like that. So as far as the kid is concerned, it's just a fun game. But then you have this sort of alternate objective of like, let's teach them coding, right? Or at least like systems thinking, just like think in that way. And this worked pretty well. A lot of people sort of, the kids kind of enjoy it because it's a game, and the parents enjoy it because it's a learning thing. So that worked out well. And Synthesis, which is my second company, was similar. Here the goal was to teach kids about like soft skills like teamwork and collaboration and things like that. And the way we did that was we made our games multiplayer by default. And so everyone just like logged into Zoom or something and played this multiplayer game. And just by getting good at the game, they also happen to get good at figuring out like what type of personality they are, or how to work with difficult people, things like that. And we actually took this like very seriously. So much so that we sort of make this design constraints. We had like a long meeting where we actually decided on what our constraints are. So in this case, it's like ensure that every player is impactful, allow players to make complex, consequential decisions, thoughtfully balance each player's mind, mouth, and hands. And so by sort of giving these clear constraints to designers, now you can go off and sort of make any game that sort of fits these constraints, and you're kind of making a game that's fit for Synthesis, right? So it sort of like freed designers up to be as creative as possible. So that's kind of my experience with EdTech. And I think over the last few years, I've sort of seen this modality sort of expand beyond EdTech into other realms. A classic example, I'd argue Fortnite is as much, like a platform and just like a place to gather as it is a game. It started off as a game, but now I don't know for a fact, but I'm assuming that most designers of Fortnite are thinking about constraints that are not to do with the core game, but the social aspect of it and all of the other things, the concept and stuff. And some more wild examples, LinkedIn. So they started this game feature, I guess, where they kind of have a few like little puzzles, and they even have a little letter that they post along with that, where they talk about why they did this. And so, reading from that, they say, every year we study the world's best workplaces. Turns out one of the best ways to deepen and reignite relationships at work is simply by having fun together. So they kind of are using games as a way to connect people and sort of rekindle old connections, because they are social networks. So that kind of makes sense, right? If you think about it from that lens. And some other examples, YouTube just recently added games as well. And I'm assuming the goal here is just to keep people engaged and coming back to get a new high score. And so once they get on the platform, that's the hardest part, right? And then you're locked in, you're watching shorts or whatever, and your YouTube gets their numbers to go up. Netflix has, as far as I've seen, a slightly different strategy. They seem to be using games as a sort of like a mixed media sort of approach, right, where they have their IP sort of leak into games, and they're using games as a second sort of touch point for the users. New York Times has games for a long time, but I just recently learned that I just saw this tweet by Matthew Moore, and he actually mentions that more people play games on the New York Times website than even read news. Right? So New York Times basically is a gaming company. So this is a powerful concept, right? Like, and these games, they're actually like made by game designers. They're full-fledged games. They just happen to be on this website, and so people maybe pay for a subscription, or they start reading the news or whatever it is. So that's an interesting sort of thing to think about. So bottom line, I think everyone sort of understands gamification and sort of these like surface level, superficial ways of getting game concepts into apps. But my learning from the industry is that you can go broader than that and think about like this whole spectrum. And so every time I think about this sort of problem, I'm thinking like where in the spectrum we should sort of target. And then I think there's creative ways to get to different levels of game integration. Yeah, that is my talk. Thank you all for.
Thanks for that. You talked about like gamification going into apps and softwares. Have you ever seen any like appification coming its way back and influencing games?
Yeah, I haven't thought deeply about that, but I think it happens all the time. Where I think games, in a lot of ways, are apps, and what I've seen is games sort of have to embody certain aspects of apps because they are apps in the sense that they need to be on the App Store and they need to do all the app things, right? So at least like technically, I often find myself doing as much non-game stuff to get a game published as game stuff. But yeah, in terms of design, I don't know. I need to think about it. I'm sure there's like tons of examples.
Maybe like a live service model
Yeah.
type of game. Yeah. Is anyone in here in the mobile game space? Yeah. I don't know. You have to think about like social features for getting users to recruit other users, like all sorts of stuff. So you want to have a cost-effective one. So.
Yeah, making things like shareable.
I have a question. So basically, the main objective of gamification in apps is to like get more people using the apps, right?
That's a good question. I think part of what I was trying to explain here is that like different companies have used games for different objectives that they have. But I think it kind of comes down to engagement and retention, right? Those are the two metrics of like once a player's in your game or whatever app, try to keep them for as long as possible, and then get them to come back when they drop off.
Yeah, for something like the New York Times, Alex over here mentioned that Wordle is one of the big games on the New York Times. When do the gamification parts become more valuable than the actual product themselves?
Well, what are you saying is the product here? Is it Wordle or is it the news?
If Wordle brings in more engagement and eventually, I guess, more revenue,
Yeah.
does every company just become a gaming company with a side bit of news on the side and a little Netflix on the side?
I mean, I feel like any gaming that could do that would do that, right? I think it's. I feel like every game needs to find their sort of wedge into the space. And New York Times is interesting because they've been doing this for a long time, right? Like people go to New York Times to play crossword and stuff forever. So they already had like an in. I think Wordle just sort of like boosted those numbers up. Yeah, so I think the key thing is every company needs to think about this in their own sort of, they have their own spin on it. And games are like a very broad term, right? Like a lot of things can fall under that. And so, yeah, so I guess it just depends on how each company approaches it.
I just wanted about because you worked at Osmo, right? And usually the game designers, you know, they create the game design, but I know you have educators also that are working side by side. Like, is it like a 50-50 split, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can talk about specifically at Osmo. I think from my experience, it sort of again differs based on the company and sort of like how important education is versus games. I think at Osmo, one of the things we learned was people bought Osmos as much for just keeping their kids engaged in a healthy sort of distracting way as for the education aspect. So for us, I would say for Osmo, the game aspect was much more important. Like our first goal was just to make a fun experience, and then education was sort of on the side. So the way we worked was we had a team of game engineers and designers sort of come up with an idea, and then we had like educators as like consultants, sorry. And we would make sure we're getting things past them before we actually put them in the product. So.
You mentioned at the beginning with Robinhood how there's a younger demographic that's involved there, and that's part of the dynamic in your mind. How much is generations and target markets and younger folks being more into games and understanding them and being able to integrate with them part of, you think, this entire thing that's going on?
Yeah, I think that plays a big role. I think we're at this point now where the people who have grown up playing games have reached adulthood, right? And they have like expendable income, and they're ready to pay for game-like experiences because they understand that. I think there's a lot of like even just like interaction and stuff, right? Like using a joystick on a phone and things like that. So you can sort of like, as you're designing these things, you can assume that your user base understands those things. I think that helps a lot. Like that's kind of how games kind of get into the critical mass, right? So yeah, was there a specific question, or was it just like?
Yeah, you gave me great. It was great feedback. Yeah, kind of spurring thoughts there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as more and more apps incorporate game-like features, do you think there's any problems that come about from that? Non-game apps incorporating gamification and more game-like features?
Yeah, I mean, with anything, I think there's obviously dark patterns, right? There's definitely ways that you can misuse these things. I think maybe there's also the problem with just like fatigue from these things. I think that's kind of what happened with gamification. Like the first few apps like Duolingo and stuff that did it, it was really cool and everyone talked about it. But now it's kind of like overused, right? Like everyone kind of uses it. And it's possible that happens in general with games. Like every app just feels like a game and you want to get out of it. But I think that's not the case right now. And so I think now is still a good time to think about this stuff, and maybe at some point that changes.
Highlight two resources and then have as a supplementary question. You just mentioned dark patterns, so that's like using UX to kind of like hook people into doing things that they don't necessarily want to do. So if you're interested in that, Celia Oden wrote a book called The Gamer's Brain. She was over at Epic Games for a very long time, so I recommend that. And I wanted to highlight that Jesse Schell's book also comes with a card deck that you can put cards that are the different lenses, like on top of your technology to look through. But that tees up my question of Jesse Shell's a legend and such a character. Do you have any great like Jesse Shell stories from?
Well, yeah, one of the things he does. So he used to be in what was it, like a traveling circus or something when he was younger. And so one of the traditions apparently that they have is when someone graduates from that, the leader of the group, I don't know the terminology, but they basically do like their hardest trick, and then if they pull it off, then that person gets good luck, for the future. So every time a class graduated, Jesse Shell would take a bunch of knives and sort of juggle them. and if he does it, which I think he was really good at it, so I don't think he ever had a risk of not doing it. But yeah, every time he did, he was like, okay, cool, you guys have good luck. So,
I've got a copy of that Jesse Shell's book of deck of lenses in the office, by the way.
Yeah,
In case anyone wants to take a look.
it's a really cool. I think that's also a great way to just think about products as well. Just take those lenses, think about your product through different lenses, and then the components were kind of like a callback to that. Actually, there are decks there are cards that specify each of those components.
So again, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Vivek, for an awesome presentation.